think I'll go ahead and get started. I just want to say welcome everybody who is here or who will be watching this recording later. I'm so excited and have a little bit of celebrity nervousness to have Elizabeth McCracken here. She is the author of an amazing book, a memoir called An Exact Replica of a Figment of My Imagination, where she talks about her own stillbirth with her little one Pudding. And so I'm just really honored to have you here. Thank you. And Leah, thank you for helping make this happen. So we're going to do a little bit of some Q&A with Elizabeth, and then we'll open it up to the rest of you to ask questions. You can use the chat feature if you want to say anything, and then we'll just use that as our way to ask questions. So I would like to introduce Leah. Leah is an author herself. Her book just came out. Do you have a copy of it in front of you or not? Or Elizabeth does. Layla, Held for a Moment. So she just wrote her own memoir. So bravo, congratulations on that. And Leah attended a retreat back in 2019. That's where I met her. And she also co-facilitated a retreat and has been hosting different writing workshops for Return to Zero Hope. She has her master's in creative writing from Drexel University. And so we're just delighted to have you here with us, Leah. Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to you to introduce Elizabeth.
Thank you, Kylie. Again, I also feel that celebrity nervousness too, because we have the one and only Elizabeth McCracken here. She was the inspiration, not only for me to write my own story, but I remember reading her book and feeling like I found a way to live afterwards. I read it pretty recently after my loss, and I dealt a lot with really severe depression and just not feeling like I wanted to go on. And I read her book, and it was the first time I felt like I could survive. So I hold this book really closely to me, and it's my go-to book for recommending for bereaved families. So I'll do an introduction of Elizabeth, and then she will go into a reading for us. She's going to read about a 10-minute passage. So first and foremost, again, we have the one and only Elizabeth McCracken. She's the author of 8 books, including her new book, the hero of this book, which I saw on display at my local bookstore, and I'm really excited to read it. She's also the author of Here's Your Hat, What's Your Hurry?, The Giant's House, Niagara Falls All Over Again, An Exact Replica of My Figment of My Imagination, which we'll be discussing today, Thunderstruck and Other Stories, Ballaway, and a collection of short stories, The Souvenir Museum. She's received grants and fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the National Endowment for the Arts, the Ligera Studies Center, the American Academy in Berlin, the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study. Thunderstruck and Other Stories won the 2015 Short Story Prize. Her work has been published in the Best American Short Stories, the Pushcart Prize, the O. Henry Prize, the New York Times Magazine, and many other places. So today she will be reading from her book, this phenomenal memoir, really life-changing book for me and for many other parents. I know that it's, again, this go-to recommendation and this eloquent, beautiful book that we have. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for being here. We're just absolutely thrilled. And if you'd like to, say anything else in terms of the introduction and roll into your reading, and then we'll head into that Q&A. So thank you.
Sure. Oh, thank you so much, Leah and Kylie. It means a lot to me to be asked to talk to you guys. And it's funny because I'm not sure I've ever read from this book before. Maybe, but I don't think so, because I didn't do any kind of book tour when it came out. Not simply because, essentially because I was pregnant when it came out with my 3rd child. And there was something about, I was like super superstitious. And also, as I'm sure everybody listening has had the experience of, also feeling like really self-conscious about how, whether I would be too depressing or nervous making for other people to gaze upon, which now seems ridiculous to me, but felt very like a very present worry then. So it's interesting that it's a book. It's the book that I get the most mail about from other bereaved parents, but it's the one that I end up talking about the least, because people don't. That the discomfort about talking about child loss sort of extends to people. Even though I always say, when people ask me questions and they say, "Are you okay talking about this?" I'm like, "Yes, I wrote an entire book about it." And in many ways, I wrote the entire book about it so that I would be able to talk about it. So this is it's an interesting experience having not read from it. I'm just going to read. The book is in little chapters, and I don't think you need to know anything other than the fact that we called my first child, our first child, my husband and I, called him Pudding. So I'm just gonna dive in. I'm lying when I say I didn't get much writing done when I was pregnant with Pudding. True enough, for a while. Most days I woke up and had breakfast, then took another nap, and then watched some television. And I'm going to keep interrupting myself and, oh yeah, you need to know this too. We were living in France in a very large house that was called Savory, in a just outside of a small town near Bordeaux. Savory had English satellite TV, and I became addicted to the gentle afternoon reality programs of the BBC, all auctions and car boot sales. The two sofas in the main living room weren't very comfortable, but they were deep and difficult to get out of, or so I told myself. But when I was about 8 months pregnant, I did something I'd never imagined doing. I started a memoir. Not only a memoir, but one in which I appeared frequently with my pants off. A memoir that would include the phrase, "my cervix," meaning mine, Elizabeth McCracken's. What the hell? I couldn't bend my attention to writing anything else, and I was 8 months pregnant, past the danger point. So I thought. And I began a funny book about being pregnant in France. I didn't tell anyone except Edward and my friend Anne because, of course, bad luck. My great-grandfather believed in the evil eye. When registering his 11 children at school, according to his daughter, my grandmother, he would never say how many there were. When you got cocky and kept count, the evil eye could snatch away a child. This was the same reason we never decided for sure on a name, the same reason Edward and I never, not once, talked about our future with our baby without looking for a piece of wood to touch. When the pregnancy was brand new in Paris, we became such devoted knockers of wood that we had a hard time making any progress through the city, lurching as we did toward park benches, paneled storefronts, tree stakes, and actual trees. We would have knocked on anything. It's amazing we didn't fling ourselves into department stores, please, monsieur, quick to a bedpost, as we wondered what the wood knocking statute of limitations was after you said aloud something that required it. Later, Edward admitted to me that when he was alone in Bergerac, he went into the church and lit candles for Pudding's safe arrival. He put his hand on his wooden bedside table so often that he was surprised it didn't take on the shape of a loose glove from erosion, like a stone he'd seen in Santiago de Compostela that had been touched by centuries of pilgrims. Pregnant with Pudding, I didn't buy baby clothes, told my family not to buy baby clothes. And then, when I was 6 months pregnant, I broke down. My first purchase was 2 pairs of tiny baby shoes in Bergerac, a pair of loafers, and some light blue leather boots with mod spaceships flying across the toes. I thought you weren't going to buy anything, Edward said. These are not for Pudding, I said. They're for some other little boy. And with that, it was easy to start buying clothing and easy to start a memoir about all my happy, uneventful pregnancy. Sorry, and easy to start a memoir all about my happy, uneventful pregnancy. Easy to thumb my nose at the evil eye. We knocked on wood and made wishes, but by 8 months, all the wishes I made were like a smug joke I had with myself. I knocked wood and I wished on stars, but sometimes there was something else to wish for, something that hadn't already been taken care of. And so I did. I just thought he was a sure thing. I wrote about our doctors, my search for a gym in the French countryside, what we ate, our friends down the road. It would make a good book, I thought. I'd end it with the three of us leaving France together. I tried not to write sentences that made it sound as though he were already born and things were fine, because I wasn't willing to tempt the evil eye that much. Eventually, I wrote 170 pages. They're still somewhere on my computer. That's another reason I wrote down, this is the happiest story in the world with the saddest ending. I was in the habit of narrating my daily life. I didn't write a single word of the second book during my second pregnancy. Here's what else we didn't do when I was pregnant the second time. Knock wood, light candles, tell 90% of the people we knew that I was pregnant, have an amniocentesis, pick up pennies, wish on stars, white horses, alarm clocks leaving 11:11, wishbones, blown dandelion fluff, buy baby clothes, pick names, find out the baby's gender, come up with an in utero name. The kid was the kid, or whoever it is, or merely the unspoken result of, if everything goes right. Begin sentences after the baby's born. Toss spilled salt over left shoulders. Give a fuck about the number 13 no matter where it showed up, no matter how much we wanted to. I can't remember how long we'd known that Pudding was dead before we declared that we would have another child, or which one of us said it first. Certainly, it was within minutes of hearing the bad news, and we both kept repeating it, not because we were done with this baby, but because that sentence, we'll have another child, was like throwing out a tow line. It was like believing in the future instead of in the place we were at that moment. We vowed to try as soon as possible. But not in August, I said after a while. August was when Pudding was conceived. August meant an April or May baby. That seemed like too much. And then we left France, and I decided to be practical about everything. I was 39. I wasn't going to toss away a whole month like that. Anyhow, what were the chances? How could we count on anything? So I couldn't say we will have another child. Instead, I said, I hope we can have another child. It was bad enough grieving for this child, my Pudding, without lamenting other only theoretical children. I missed the child we lost, and I wanted another, and these seemed like two absolutely separate aches. He was a person. I missed him like a person. Seeing babies on the street did not stab me with pain the way I know they stab some grieving women, those who have lost children or simply desperately want to have them. For me, other babies were other babies. They weren't who I was missing. Every now and then a baby could take me by surprise and make me weep. For instance, an emailed photo of my cousin Rosalie's son who, I realized as I stared at it and closed the file and opened it up again, looked like I'd imagined Pudding, though as it happened, we shared none of the same blood. Babies born to mothers who'd been pregnant at the same time hurt me a little. I didn't mind hearing about them, but I didn't want to meet them. That puzzled me since it wasn't logical. And even in mourning, I liked to think I was logical. But it was an unhappiness that rose up in me even months later when I was already pregnant, though not broadcasting it. And I saw a friend who'd had a baby 3 months after me, a wonderful woman who, because she had just become a mother, was so sympathetic and sweet to me. Most people didn't even mention Pudding. She enfolded me in a hug and said, "Oh, Elizabeth, I am so sorry about your baby." And I just wanted her to leave because I didn't want to be a good and decent and functioning human being and ask after her baby. Even now, I have a hard time with the babies born to friends around Pudding's birth. It's not logical, and yet there it is. This one is 1 month older, this one 3 weeks younger. But mostly, I just missed my own child. About a week after Pudding's death, I got an email in my email box, a photograph of the newborn son of a very lovely woman who'd been a student of mine at Iowa. She'd known I was pregnant, but her friends had very wisely kept silent about what had happened so as not to terrify her, and therefore her husband didn't know he shouldn't send me a photograph of a newborn baby boy. A few weeks later, and it would have been fine. By then, when friends reported that someone I knew had had a baby, they usually added, I didn't know whether to tell you or not, but I figure, oh, I always said, if human reproduction has to carry on, I want it to work out for people I like. Still, I wouldn't have minded a pause in the whole business. A sudden harmless moratorium on babies being born. Doctors would tell the unfortunate pregnant, I'm sorry, it happens sometimes. Title, we think. For everyone else, 9 months, but for you, 11 months, maybe a year, maybe more. Don't go outside. Don't leave your house. Stroke your stomach, fine, but only in your own living room. Keep your lullabies to yourself. We'll let you know when it's time. That lovely former student sent a horrified apology when she found out what had happened, but of course, I understood. That is one of the strangest side effects of the whole story. I am that thing worse than a cautionary tale. I am a horror story, an example of something terrible going wrong when you least expect it, and for no good reason. A story to be kept from pregnant women, a story so grim and lessonless, I think it's better not to think about it at all. Stop there on that downward turn.
That was so magnificent. And the fact that you're sharing your words, and reading it from the first time, it's just so amazing. So thank you. And all of that excerpt too, you picked, it had everything I feel that embodies your work, which is this element of superstition, this element of kind of reckoning with that, as well as how grief isn't logical. And it was so brilliant. So thank you. And do you mind sharing your decision to pick that particular passage with us?
Sure. I mean, the one time I did read from this book is I did the audiobook, which I was sort of remembered as I started reading it. And I partially remember it because in the middle of it, David Sedaris not him personally, but he had to come in and record some stuff in the same recording booth that I was in. And so I got kicked out. And I remember, oh yeah, that's right. I did do that. I was looking for something that tried to cover everything. There was actually another section that had more, that I almost read, that had more swears in it. And this one only has one swear. There's probably more swearing in this book than anything else that I've written. I think that's true. And it's all, extremely autobiographical and deeply felt, every single 4-letter word. But because you're right, when I write, I do think about superstition a lot. When I think about life, and I say both that I don't believe in any of it, and yet I am also believe in all of it at the same time. But also because I do. The funny thing is in reading this, I can't remember what woman it was who. I remember very clearly the student who had a baby, but I can't remember who the woman who enveloped me in a hug and said, "I'm so sorry about your baby," and that I was just absolutely furious at her. But I do. There are things that I have forgotten, and that I'm glad that I wrote down so that I'll remember them, which was part of the reason that I wrote the book in the first place. But I do. I'm so sorry that I meant to turn this off. It's my husband calling. I've silenced him. But I remember that quality of being, as I say, somebody that other people would be afraid of. And that's the reason I chose this section.
Wonderful. Going off of that, and before Kylie goes into her question, could you share a little bit about the element of superstition. So one time at a writer's workshop, somebody was reading an early draft of my book and they said, well, I would never believe a superstitious narrator. It's just not a story that I could read. So I actually was considering writing out this superstitious element because it's like, you know, are people going to read my book if I'm superstitious? Did you experience, you know, any setbacks writing about superstition? Was it an easy choice for you? Uh, what did you feel when you're writing the story and, you know, adding in that element and why it was important?
So when I wrote this book, I didn't tell anybody that I was writing it. Not even Edward, my husband. He knew that I was, and I wrote it in a very short period of time after my son Gus was born, my second child. And he I mean, I think he could hear me typing away in there, but you know, that I didn't say that I was working on a memoir or what it was about. And so the experience, and it's funny because before then I would have certainly told him and other friends of mine what I was working on. I would have given pieces of the work to people to read while it was in process. I now don't show anything until I'm finished and don't talk about a book. I've since then sort of adopted that process, but it was a strange one to me then, and so I didn't. I was very sleep deprived. My Gus was 3 weeks old. I wrote it in 3 weeks, in little pieces, and it was an intense experience, but less intense in some ways. But the questions about setbacks and what other people thought, because I didn't even know that I don't want to sound disingenuous about it, but I didn't even necessarily think I was writing a book. I thought I might be. I was trying to write nice sentences and get it on the page, but I was aware that every month that I waited, I would write a different book, and I had not written anything at all during my second pregnancy because of superstition. And I wanted to get as much as I could remember on the page before I forgot it or shaped it or thought about it differently, or in some cases before I forgave some people. I wanted to get that particular emotion on the page. So I think I was weirdly not thinking about other readers. I don't know if that answers your question.
It does. Wow. This element of superstition is just so fascinating. I remember once I was working a retreat, and a woman told me that her child died because she was cursed, and this idea of, I don't know, this idea of these superstition and beliefs that are in us, and how we overcome them at times. And I think that your book really shows this element. It's so powerful and it's so real. We have stories, and this element of belief that kind of is woven throughout your text is just so powerful, and it's so honest, and I think so relatable. And then I'll let Kylie roll into hers, but thank you.
I mean, I think you've answered some of this. It's like, when did you first decide you wanted to write and share your story? But the timing, like, you didn't want to write when you were pregnant again. And you were trying to capture as much as you could remember. But why did you like start when you did? And you didn't, and you said you didn't even know you were writing a book. So like 3 weeks postpartum, like what made you start writing then?
I mean, I think I wanted to get stuff down. I also, I mean, it's definitely a book shaped by a lot of things, but sleep deprivation is one of them. It is in little pieces. I also knew when I was writing it. So I finished the draft and I gave it to Edward to read. Because I was trying to decide what to do with it by the time I finished it. And I think his experience was sort of, yes, this is an accident report of the accident that we were in. Like he said, I think you need to give it, that it was, he found it moving, but not, he couldn't assess it as anything other than our experience. And then I gave it to my agent, who really loved it and said, oh no, I think it is a book. And I made my agent, who's a very literary person, read it first, because the thing that I knew for certain is that if he said, I think it's pretty good, but I think it needs more work, I would have put the book in a drawer and not done anything else with it. Like I had no interest in shaping it in a different way or just on working it. Not because I would have believed him that it needed more work. It wasn't that I went, well, this is, you can't touch this, it's perfect. It was just that having written it had done for me what I wanted it to do. And really, my friend Paul Lisicki, who's a wonderful writer and memoirist, some years later, I said to him, we went to graduate school together and we were always told, writing's not therapy. And I was talking to him and I said of an exact replica of A Figment of My Imagination, I said, I know that writing is not therapy, but writing that book saved my life. And Paul said, why can't it be both? And it was really like I heard those chords of oh yeah, no, it can be. Why were we told that, writing is not therapy, as though writing's not for weaklings, or something like that. But it had done that for me by the time I had finished it. And so but Henry liked it and Paul read it for me too, and he liked it. And then my longtime editor read it and she did not like it, did not publish it, gave it to somebody who said, well, I really like books that talk about transcendence, that have some uplift at the end. And I was like, guess what? that is not my experience. And this is not, I'm not writing a book about how everything turned out for the best or life lessons I learned by going through the most terrible experience in my life. But somebody else who understood it, another editor read it, and
In the group chat, you just mentioned how writing the book saved your life. We have another participant here. She said, your book was one of the things that saved my life. It's been 3 years since my daughter died, and this book brought me out of a dark place. It was so real and close to what I was feeling, exactly like a horror story that others could not understand. I have a hard time with children born around the same time as Nora. The reminder cuts so deep. One difference in me is that I wanted to shout my experience from the rooftop so people are aware and to know and remember her life because she lived in me. Your book was the thing that saved my life. So it's just...
I'm so sorry, Jennifer.
And just that idea and just hearing your experience of how it, wrote you to this place where you were able, to feel like you just this will to live. And I felt that through your text, and it seems like others do too. I know that we talked a little bit about, any setbacks before at first, or did you face anything after publication?
I'm trying to think. I was thinking when you said that, I'm always fascinated with the horrible things that people say, people who have lost children. I have no idea why. I have a friend whose grandmother said, well, I just, heaven just needs more babies. It's being and every now and then somebody will say something and they're almost all, not all of the horrible things, they're almost all look on the bright side, don't be so glum, chum. You can, or minimizing. And I'm trying to think of afterwards. There was the road to publication was funny in that way, and I have an emotionally healthy habit, which I sometimes later regret, which is that I delete horribly. If there's an email that causes me pain, I delete it so I can't keep reading it. And I'm really sorry that I deleted the editorial note from from the woman who didn't know me. My editor had given it to her saying, basically, you know, nobody wants to read a book that's this depressing. And I had another friend who is a wonderful reader, but who had the same reaction to the book. And I think those are most of the setbacks. You know, it was, yeah. And mostly I do about this book, I do hear from, hear from other people who have lost children. And it's not why I wrote it, but it's incredibly meaningful to me when people write. Like, that is to say, it didn't occur to me that I was doing anything. I think almost everybody who goes through this kind of loss, you know, we have that feeling that we're the only person it's ever happened to. And when I wrote it, I was definitely feeling that way, but it's, Kylie, it's a little like what you said before the webinar started about return to zero, which is that when you make something that is very directly about your own experience, without you realizing it, well, it radiates out. It becomes useful because of the specifics, I think.
Someone is raising their hand, but would you mind putting that in the chat? Whatever, Jojo, just typing into the chat. That would be great. I'm gonna ask you. You begin your story with a lady from a book reading who told you to write about the lighter side of losing a child. Throughout the book, you grace your reader with a wonderful sense of humor despite the sadness. Can you describe what it was like to develop that narrative voice? Was it just what came out of you?
It is just what came out of me. I will say the other, this is not a setback, but some of the reviews I got complained about me, thought that I was very mean to that woman, who I did not feel. I feel very tender towards her, and I still think about her. This woman who came to a reading of mine and said that I should write before I knew what it meant, said I should write a book about the lighter side of losing a child. I do really, and this is in the book, I do really think I'm not a religious person and don't particularly believe in God, but I do think that the Black humor when terrible things happen is the surest sign that there must be a God, because it is like a comfort when terrible things happen, that the human ability to laugh at things, not to laugh at other things, but to actually laugh at the terrible things that are happening or something that happens around them. There's a line in this book about Edward hearing somebody asking in French, "Would you like to see a nun?" And he misheard my French accent, which was bad then and is non-existent now. The word for nun is very close to the word for dwarf. And he thought that this woman was saying, "Would you like to see a dwarf?" And he said to me, "I thought, yes. I thought it would cheer me to see a mythical creature in a pointed hat. That would be great." And I do, I mean, it's my nature to make jokes at terrible times. But I'm also really grateful when other people are willing to make jokes. And I also think, again, you know, anybody who has gone through really any kind of loss knows that because you do become kind of frightening to other people who aren't going through the same experience, that somebody who is willing to make a joke is seeing you as a human being and not as a representation of something terrible. And that feels very important to me at all difficult times.
Yeah.
When we were advertising the webinar, somebody commented, the dwarf, this is the best book.
At one point I got a review from somebody who said that it was the funniest book about a dead baby of all time. And I was like, I loved that review. I was like, yes, that is what I would like to, that is what I would like to write. I would like the honestness of the assessment that it is a book about a dead baby, that it's not careful about what it's about, and that it is also in places funny.
Yeah, I mean, humor is so important, so important. And I was saying right before the webinar started also that, you know, Sean in the film Return to Zero uses a lot of humor to kind of bring you out of the depths of the darkness, kind of like, so it's not all completely like that.
It's like oxygen,
Yeah.
a joke at the right time.
We have a participant, Mauve. I was sent a copy of your book right after my son died. I was recovering from an emergency C-section and I had to stop reading for a few days because I was laughing so hard I thought my stitches would burst. So great. And I'm thinking too of
I have to say, I want that on the back of my book. I'm like, what a great blurb that other people wouldn't understand, but we would. Yes. I laughed so hard my emergency C-section stitches almost broke.
What a relief to know that I still had a deep, full-bodied laughter. And I remember the moment when I was able to laugh after my daughter died. And it's just, what a gift that you're able to have that voice. And, you know, I was thinking what the editor said when the book was too depressing. And I think for us lost parents, we think it's funny. Like, we're like, this is great. You know, and when I was reading and I didn't feel it was depressing, it felt very real. And I think it's just so interesting and just so great to hear that experience and, you know, how you're able to find that humor. I think it is a gift.
Can I read the next comment in the chat? This is from Jessica, who I know. So hello, Jessica. She says, "Dear Elizabeth, I also want to thank you for sharing your story with us. My daughter was stillborn in 2006. My father sent your book to me when it came out, a surprise gift in the mail, no note attached. In the 16 years since her death, this has been his only acknowledgement of my loss. Clearly, it has been difficult for him to find words, and I hope that will change one day, but your book provided a way for him to reach out to me. Thank you for being the voice that saved so many of us during the early days."
Thank you, Jessica.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah, that's just incredibly meaningful.
Mm.
And my pudding was born in 2006 too. Same year.
Mm.
In an author interview, you said novels are agony, life is agony, but writing the memoir itself was not. Please share a little bit more about this.
Yeah, it's I was doing a interviewing Ann Patchett, who's a dear friend of mine, a couple of days ago, and somebody asked, you know, what's harder, novels, nonfiction, or children's books? And she said that's hardest, least hard in descending order. And then she said she once said that in front of a bunch of children's book authors, and she had to write a public apology because they were so upset. And writing this book was the easiest book I ever wrote. And I've never written anything that quickly. I wrote it in 3 weeks, and before it came out, I think my editor, Reagan Arthur, wonderful, asked me to make it just slightly longer, and I made it just, so there's a section that I wrote afterwards, but that was really the only editing I did. And I think it was easy because I was sort of just trying to record how I was feeling at that time. And I didn't make any feel like I made very few artistic decisions, that I wrote it as I was thinking about it. I certainly didn't outline it or make a plan. I just started writing and wrote in a straight line. And I didn't have to make anything up. I didn't have to worry about whether the character was sympathetic, because I didn't care. And again, not everybody who reads the book finds the narrator, who is me, sympathetic. And I think also because I didn't think there were so many things I was terrified about writing about. I don't mean to say that I sort of blithely went, oh, you know, I didn't know that it would be easy. In fact, when I started writing it, even though I wasn't thinking of writing it for publication, I thought it was going to be hard. And the thing that I discovered is that the shadows that terrifying things cast are much more frightening than actually writing about them when you're close up. So there were a couple of things that I thought, oh my God, it's going to be so difficult to write about the actual birth. There was a moment, I haven't thought about this in a long time, about opening up the box of the baby clothes that we had bought in France for Pudding. And then they went into a storage area with a bunch of other stuff. And all of that stuff got shipped back to us and arrived a little after Gus was born. And I thought, oh God, writing about that is going to be horrible. But by the time I got to it, it wasn't horrible. And it wasn't horrible because it was so useful to me to turn abstract feelings into sentences. Yeah, so it was easy in that way because it was useful. And I'd never feel that way writing a novel, that it's useful to me or to anybody else.
Wow. We did a workshop last week talking about, we had a group of panelists talking about writing nonfiction. This wasn't on the list of questions, but do you have any tips for how you approached writing about real places and people? You know, as a fiction writer, I'm sure the process was a bit different for nonfiction. Did you have to anonymize certain things, or how did you not worry too much about it, or was that an obstacle that you kind of ran into while writing?
It's a really interesting question, because I think every writer has a different sort of code of ethics or code of conduct. And I would also like to say, I think it's such a useful thing to do, to write about anything that's difficult in your life. As it happens, I've never been in talk therapy, but I imagine that the gifts of it are very similar, that it's just that sort of sense of the things that terrify you to think about. It's useful to put them into sentences and to see that they're actually less terrifying once just organized by grammar. But when I was writing it, one of my decisions was, the dialogue that is in quotation marks in the book is as close to verbatim from my memory. Now, I understand the thing is about memories is that you are changing the narrative, 5 seconds afterwards, you're already slightly fictionalized things or changing things. But if it's in quotation marks, it's as close to as I could remember. And if I couldn't remember, then I would paraphrase it. The people who have their own names in the book, I asked permission for. So my American OBGYN and my husband, obviously, my friends who appear by name. And then there were a lot of people whose names I changed because I didn't want to ask permission to put them in. And so they're not anonymous, but they also are unfindable. That they're largely people in France who I knew there. But I realized this when I was looking through. We stayed in this crazy house that had been a home for wayward children at one point and was being rented out for bed and breakfast. And I changed the name of the landlady, but I did not change the name of the house for some reason. And when I was looking, I was like, oh, I probably should have changed the name of the house.
Did you use any, while looking and researching, did you write all from memory? Did you use any primary resources? Like, did you keep a journal or did you look at hospital records?
Entirely from memory.
Wow.
Entirely from memory. I didn't look at that comic memoir that I wrote. I didn't. Yeah, I mean, it was within a year that I wrote the book. And it is very possible that I got things wrong. But again, because I was writing it really for myself, I didn't worry about it when I was writing it. And then once I had finished writing it, I thought, yeah, it's either this or it's nothing.
Well, and I also think that when you have that next child, like when they're born, that there's a lot of grief that will resurface. That's, I mean, I don't know. For myself, like I felt like my pregnancy with my next child, everything, all the grieving part for me went to the side. And then so when she was born, a lot of stuff came up that I was really not expecting. But I'm just wondering, in your case, like maybe you could access a lot of the memories because of the parallels of the delivery and the, you know, like that type of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. It was all stuff I had been thinking about. And also a lot of stuff that I had put off thinking about when I was pregnant the second time.
Yeah.
I have to ask, what was that postpartum writing period like? Like, I just imagine you with coffee, like not sleeping, up all night. Was there like, do you have any certain memory while you were writing in that creative fog that you might have been in?
Yes, and I have felt bad because I often say to my students my graduate students, I teach graduate students, and they'll say, you know, I just don't know whether I can get any writing done. And I said, it's easy to get writing done with a newborn. And I really messed somebody up who found, like, I wasn't thinking that thing that I remember about everything, both for pregnancy and writing, which is like everybody is different. And she said, why did you tell me that? I got nothing done. And when I was pregnant with Matilda, who I was pregnant with when this book came out, but not during the writing of it, I actually discovered that I was somebody who was really bad at writing when pregnant completely. Like I just couldn't do it. And the minute I had been trying to write something on assignment, the minute that she was born, I suddenly could write. And so I actually think that was going on when I was writing this book, was that I suddenly could write, and I suddenly was thinking in sentences. I took 3 weeks, Gus was 3 weeks old, and I had him in a little baby Bjorn brand bounce, one of those chairs at an angle. And like, it seems to me that I often, when he was asleep or a little fussy, I am doing it right now with my foot in that same way that, you know, your muscle memory, I bounced it like it was an old fashioned sewing machine. I remember doing that and typing, sitting on a sofa. But and that, you know, the book is written in little chapters, and I think I just wrote one little chapter at a time. But it's punctuated by lack of sleep, and also structured by the fact that my time wasn't my own, and the fact that suddenly my brain felt clearer after.
Wow.
But I no longer say to students, when you have one newborn in the house, no other children, that's easy. Stop complaining. I don't do that anymore.
That's it. Thank you for sharing that. We have Heather's question. Many years later, where is your grief now?
It's an interesting question, because weirdly, I saw an old friend when I was in Iowa last month, or no, actually just earlier this month. And we were talking about early pregnancies and difficulty. And I was really, I was surprised by how suddenly sad I felt about the loss of this first child in a way that I hadn't felt, in that it felt fresh in a way that it hadn't felt fresh in a long time. I do, I do think about him. It's not, I think that I, it, it never gets better. It does get easier. That's how I feel. Yeah. But it's definitely, I think about him, which I also find as a comfort. And when the loss was new, and I talked to people or read who had gone through a loss before mine, and that they said that they still thought about their children, that was a huge comfort to me. And I can say it's true for me because it's been 16 years.
Beautiful.
So your book has impacted so many bereaved parents. So first, I just want to say thank you on behalf of everybody who can't be here, who can't say that. So thank you. What advice would you give people in the audience today who, and I would say maybe more who are in the earlier stages of their grieving journey?
I mean, to me, the most important thing is to find people who can talk to you about it without easily and without fumbling around. And I think, she appears in my book. My friend Lib was somebody who who had gone through not the loss of a child, but a lot of loss in her life. Who could just listen to me talk and not treat me like a radioactive object. And that, I think, is the most important thing. If you can find somebody, either by reaching out to your friends or to support groups, or groups like the ones that you run, that seems like the most important thing to me. And I do think writing things down, and also, this may be, it's probably that anybody who's listening knows this, but to let yourself be wretchedly sad. You can think, somebody told me this, I'm just remembering this then, that, grief is a debt, and you can pay it now, or you can pay it later, but someday it will come due. And I think that was true for me. And I sunk into it, which is what the book is about. And I was very lucky in that I had a life in which I could do that. I know that not everybody does, but I think to the extent that you can feel your grief sooner, rather than trying to put it aside, because I do think it will come. It comes. I think it was Ann Patchett maybe who told me that somebody had said to her that grief is a debt, and you can pay it now or you can pay it later. And not that you ever pay it in full. Well, just to extend the metaphor, I don't think that happens. But I think you can. I think that there are great reasons to let yourself feel as sad as you can, as sad as you want to, early on.
Thank you. Anything else, Lee, or should I open it up to see?
Yeah.
Does anyone have any other questions? You can type it in the chat. It's been kind of nice. People have been communicating throughout the whole time.
I usually remember to turn off my self view, because I feel like I'm much better when I can't see a version of myself going on in the corner of the screen.
The joys of Zoom. I think we got a new question, Kylie.
Yeah. Okay. This is from Laura. She says, your book found me in the early days after the death of my daughter, which will be 5 years ago this November. I often feel silent in my daily living about this arena of my life, and both your book and the voice in this interview validates the range of feelings that we continue to experience. Feeling less alone in this experience gives me hope. Thank you for the words you wrote, and now for your encouragement to consider writing these experiences down. Any input for those of us who might be new to a writing practice?
Thank you so much, Laura. I think that I was saying this to a student of mine on a different topic yesterday, which is that the biggest cause of not writing is not writing, and that the sooner you can get to your chair and start writing, the better. It might sound fast to say, but I think start, and to also think about writing, if you normally are using a computer a lot, writing longhand, just something that gets you to the, I know that there are some writers who write everything based on, deciding logically how to do things. As a writer, I'm somebody who really needs to sort of like access my subconscious to write things that are meaningful to me. And I think trying to figure out a way to sort of unhook the little rowboat of your brain from the dock of like pure logic, the better off you are. I think especially if you're writing about difficult things. So handwriting, or thinking about what you want to write before you sit down as you go for a long drive or go for a walk or walk through an art museum, or even just before you go to sleep when our brains are sort of letting loose of the logic of the day. And just try to write a sentence. I think one of the reasons why I wrote this book is because I didn't think I was writing a book. And I think, in generally speaking, for people thinking, oh, now I am writing a book, is terrifying and overwhelming. So I think if you think I'm writing a sentence, I'm writing a paragraph, I'm writing one memory, I'm writing about one day, that's the best way to start. And you don't need to write every day. I always feel very obligated to say that because it's advice that people give a lot, and I have never written every day.
I think it might have been Matt Clam or another writer, Melissa Bank. It was one of them because I was taking a writing workshop with them. And they also told me, even if you're half asleep and you really don't want to get out of bed to write down that idea, do it. And it was one of the best pieces of advice, because I find myself, my mind might be, racing or something the middle of the night, and I might be half asleep, but just writing that sentence down or that little nugget, I'll have something to work on the next day. And I found that that reminded me of what you were saying. Just really helpful. Just jot it down.
It's so funny because it's great advice, and it never has occurred to me that that's the reason you should do it. I do it because I will forget it.
Yeah.
But it hadn't occurred to me it's also because you're thinking dream thoughts, mm-hmm. which can be truer than logic thoughts, I think.
Mm. Well, I think we're over time, and I just want to respect everybody's time. Leah, thank you for being here, for organizing this. Elizabeth, thank you so much for taking part of your Saturday and spending it with us. And of course, just thank you for this beautiful book that you've put into the world. So we're so grateful.
Thank you so much. It's meant a lot to me to be here.
Thank you.
I mean, here the electronic space, not in my
yes
dining room.